to throw. One-on-one, Davis has it. Touchdown! Carolina wins! Carolina is the Coastal Division champion! Javonte Williams to the left of Howell. He'll send him out into the flat right side. Howell looking, standing tall, lets it go, man there! Touchdown! Touchdown, Carolina! The pistol, Jackson behind him. Hands off to Jackson, he tried a jump pass, and it's intercepted! Zack intercepts it! Holy cow, Carolina's gonna win! And off to Javonte Williams again, pops it to the left. Javonte leaps over a man, crosses the 50, trucks over a defender, spins by another. Goodness gracious, he's down to about the 15, and he did absolutely everything in one carry.
Here's the shotgun snap to Aguilar. Drops back, pressure coming, Aguilar floats it up, incomplete! No flags! Head on back up the mountain! Carolina wins it in double overtime! Loftus, out of the shotgun, throws to the end zone, incomplete! Incomplete! The bell belongs to us! Carolina wins it 47-45 in double overtime!
Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta, here with you guys as always. Coming to you live from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Zach Hubbard back home with us as well. So that means it's another recruiting edition of the podcast here on the Heel Tough Blog Network. And so, tonight we're going to be talking a lot about Calvin Thomas, Carolina's most recent commitment. But we're also going to be talking about where the class stands as a whole. Carolina's done some work here over the last couple of weeks to add to a class that had a lot of commitments but didn't have a lot of headliners. Now Carolina's got those. And so we're going to talk about those guys a little bit more, tell you what we think about where the class stands just overall. But first of all, we got to get into the headliner, one of the headliners of this class. And now the headliner of the defensive side of the ball, if you're going off of just rankings, and that is Calvin Thomas, the 2026 four-star linebacker out of the state of Texas, Cypress Ranch High School in Cypress, Texas. So Carolina goes into the state of Texas to take away a commitment from the Longhorns, as well as Nebraska, two teams that it really seemed like had leads at times in this recruitment. Carolina does everything that they need to do, though, and seals the deal. The number 254 overall prospect, the number 18 overall linebacker in this class. And there's just a ton to like about what he brings to the table. You look at his junior season at Cypress Ranch High School, he finished with 69 total tackles, 15 tackles for loss, 7 sacks, an interception, a pass defense, and a fumble recovery on his way to earning first-team all-district honors. This was really one big year of production for Thomas after he played in just 5 games as a sophomore, racking up 8 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, half a sack, and 1 quarterback hurry in the little that he did play back as a sophomore. But there's still time. There's an extra year for him, and so he's going to play his senior year out. It'll be interesting to see how he progresses this year. But Zach, again, when you talk about this player, Calvin Thomas, a guy who measured in at 6'3", 210 pounds, he has all the traits that you need to be a successful linebacker at this level, and that's one of the big reasons that Carolina went out and picked him up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we sort of discussed it a little bit on the previous edition of the podcast, but there's no denying that this is an absolute win for this staff. And this is a guy that brings a high-level athleticism. I mean, they beat out programs like Texas, like Nebraska for him. This is a true blue chip prospect above even the top 500 to be a composite 4-star really wherever you look. So this guy brings a lot to the table from an athletic profile, and you sort of see that on the film. This is a guy that really shines athletically in his play, can really do a lot of different stuff for you playing both as an off-ball linebacker and as a blitzer. You don't see a ton on his film right now in terms of coverage, which seems more so a factor as to not only who they're playing. You know, in high school, there's a lot of teams that still play a lot of just more so schemes that are going to run the football, or they're going to, you know, be more option focused as opposed to passing. But on a lot of pass plays, they have him blitzing. So he's going, you know, through the A gap, through the B gap from that second level to get to the quarterback, and is quite successful doing so, what you see with his sack numbers. So he fits the profile of a lot of these sort of modern linebackers that we see, that are these guys that aren't the big 250-pound linebackers that you'd see, you know, 15 or 20 years ago. It's guys that are closer to what would have been safety size, but are, you know, big, long in terms of their range. He's a guy that does appear to have pretty long arms and is 6'3". So, I mean, you look at him a little bit skinny on sort of that lower frame, but you see the length there. You see his ability to move sideline to sideline. I think that's the biggest trait that sort of pops off the page to me, is you see teams trying to run outside, and he is very quickly and without, you know, a ton of effort at this point, from point A to point B, to you know, tackle a guy in the backfield or behind the line of scrimmage. So there's really not much that I can say other than this is a huge pickup for the staff. This seems like a guy that really any defensive program would want to have, and I'm very excited that this is a guy that is on the commit list at this point.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's hard not to be excited about a player like this, because this is, you know, another guy that fits exactly what this staff is looking for in terms of an aggressive player. He's a downhill linebacker who loves making plays in the run game. That's the area that he really specializes in. You mentioned it. He gets after the quarterback. There's no question about that. They love blitzing him as well. That's a big part of why he was so successful last season. But it definitely feels like he's one of those guys that once he gets into this system as a middle linebacker, you know, yeah, we're going to see him blitzed. Carolina did it a lot last year. You've got an even more aggressive scheme, I think, that you're going to see this year from Stephen Belichick. But I do believe that this is a guy that can do basically anything that you want him to. All of the athletic tools are there for him. He has great lateral speed. You talked about the sideline to sideline speed. The thing is that it doesn't show up often on his film, but you mentioned it. When guys run to the outside, he's there. He always seems to be there because of just how fast he is. And that's something that you just can't teach. Those are things that just have to be there for guys at this level, and you need that at the linebacker spot because you need to be able to cover ground quickly. You know, when I watched him on film, it reminded me a lot of what Cedric Gray used to look like when he was in high school. Same build, same makeup, a guy that, you know, I don't know if he has as good a hands as Cedric Gray had. Cedric Gray was a guy that played wide receiver when he was in high school, but just the way that he plays as a player, being aggressive, getting downhill, having the speed to cover sideline to sideline, being a smart player, I think those are the things that you really want to see. Now, when with the aggression does come some missed tackles. That's one of the things that I saw some of the people that were talking about him that also did scouting reports on him like I did, talked about it. More people that got to go out to games and watch him. So that's an area that he's got to get cleaned up. There's no doubt about that. If you're going to be aggressive, that's fine, but you got to be able to make tackles consistently. There should be no questions, though, about his motor, which appears to run hot, just like the players that this staff has been adding in this class, just like the players that they added at the end of the 2025 class. Biggest concern, and I'm with you, Zach, is him dropping into coverage. We don't know what exactly he is in that area because you simply do not see it on his highlight tape. Could be an area that is a weakness. Certainly when you don't see it on your highlight film, you'd imagine there are teams, especially in the state of Texas, that were able to throw the football. So I would imagine that he is a guy that, needs a little bit of work in that area. But I will say with his athleticism, it's an area that he should be able to get better in at the college level. There's no doubt that this is a massive addition for this class, especially in the middle of that linebacking core. And now you've got 2 linebackers in the class. So that's another area that really helps you. But when it comes to, improving as a player, Zach, I mean, I feel like this is a guy that probably doesn't have the highest floor out there, but certainly has one of the highest ceilings of the guys that Carolina has brought in on the defensive side of the ball in this class.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it sort of there's a path here that you can see with other guys, or that you have seen in the past, where you look at the film, you say, okay, they're showing athleticism, they're showing ability to get to the quarterback and play sideline to sideline. We don't know what they're going to be in the pass game as of yet, but you feel like with that athleticism, the coaching staff, to some degree, depending on where they use them early on, whether that be just on special teams or maybe a few snaps here and there, are going to sort of, allow for that leeway of, we understand that you're going to make mistakes, but this is something that you have the opportunity and seem to have the natural gifts to grow into. So I don't think it's a huge concern from that aspect. Really, to be perfectly honest, with a lot of these high school linebackers, you don't see them playing in the pass game a ton, or what you see is, just little stuff here and there, just based on where high school passing games are. So that's not a concern from me at the front end. But as we've sort of mentioned here as an overall statement, this is another headliner guy, and a guy out of the state of Texas playing, at the highest classification for Texas football. So that the competition that he's playing is high quality, and he is, getting through high level offensive lines, getting to what are going to be, probably Division I or FBS, some Power 5 running backs, quarterbacks, things along those lines. So overall, with who he is as a prospect and what you have to work with here, I think you feel very good about what he offers in that aspect. So I can see him being a guy that plays somewhere early. I feel like they're going to find some sort of spot for him somewhere. Is that a starting linebacker spot as a freshman? No, that's not really what I'm saying. But is he a guy that I could see early on special teams? And, you always see a few of these freshmen each year that they're not going to redshirt. They're going to have a role, whether that be on special teams or whether that's just getting a few snaps per game, maybe it, off-ball linebacker, will linebacker, what have you. I could see him being a guy that fits that role in his freshman year or redshirt freshman, sophomore, what have you, and sort of growing and developing into that role, either as a will or Mike linebacker in his sophomore redshirt freshman year, something along those lines. But based on his athleticism, he strikes me as a guy that we could see play early, just because he has things that they can't teach. They got to build that up for him, but he's got what it takes to play very early, just based on that athletic profile.
Yeah, I think it's the fact that you've got the athletic profile, and I think that it's the fact that the linebacking core that you're dealing with is not exactly the deepest. And it is going to be a group that, after the season is over, is going to have to address the losses of Andrew Simpson and Mekhi Bayor, who are going to play significant roles for the team this year. But they won't be here next year. They're going to graduate. And so after that, who does Carolina really have at the linebacker spot? I mean, look, they bring in a lot of guys here in this here in the spring, or excuse me, in the fall. They bring in a lot of guys that were a part of the 2025 class, but these guys don't have the upside that a guy like Calvin Thomas is going to have. Kamori House will still be with the unit. That's a big one that Carolina is going to have moving forward. But then you're talking about guys like Evan Bennett, Tamir Hickman-Collins, a transfer out of the portal. And then you're getting into some of the true freshmen that, we're going to really look at this year and try to evaluate. And Tyler Hauser, Jake Bauer, Lance Pascal, those are guys that I think have a chance to succeed at Carolina, but I don't think that they have the upside that Calvin Thomas has. So I wouldn't be shocked if he finds himself with an early role in Chapel Hill, especially if he comes in and impresses, because you've got that athletic profile that he's got and the fact that he's aggressive. If he continues to be aggressive, if he's a guy that's getting after running backs in the run game, if he's a guy that can get after the quarterback consistently. You never really know what type of role he could find himself in, maybe as a rotational guy. I wouldn't expect him to be a starter right away. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that with the mindset that he brings to the table, and with the fact that he has the athleticism, I could see him being somewhere in the 2 deep starting next year. And that would be huge for Carolina to have a guy like that that's already making that sort of impact. And there's a few guys that I feel like, in this class can probably do that. There's not really many of them, even out of the 32 that they have. But he is one of those guys, and I think that's what's so special about this pickup. The fact that you've got the measurables is huge. And that's a big thing. I mean, you look at, where the class is right now. So 32 total commitments. The class ranks 19th in the overall recruiting rankings. Calvin Thomas is right up there at the top. And I think his position going to be a much more wide open position than the guy that's ahead of him and is considered the headline player in this class in Keon Chapman at wide receiver. So, when you look at this guy, I think him, Zack, along with Trayshawn Ruffin, who is going to be needed almost immediately on the interior of that defensive line for Carolina to provide depth. Those are probably the 2 guys that have the best chance to come in and make immediate impacts for Carolina in this class.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a number of these guys that we've spoken about that we feel are probably more developmental, but I'd say those 2 in Ruffin and now Thomas are the guys that we can see, making an early impact here. They do have other highly recruited and highly rated guys we've talked about, guys like Travis Burgess at quarterback, Keon Chapman here recently at wide receiver, but those are positions that look like they're a little bit deeper or have a harder path to playing time. Potentially a guy, another sort of headline or, top 500 or blue chip, whatever sort of metric you want to use, guy in Xavion Griffin-Haynes at the edge position. That's a position that we don't really know a ton about right now, but does have a number of guys in front of him. So that seems a little bit iffy. And then from there, there's a number of other guys we see as more developmental at the moment. So it's hard to really project those guys. But the class, I think, is coming along nicely. It is sort of getting to the point where there are not as many prospects on the board, but it feels like it's in a good spot overall, I would say. Like you mentioned, 19 overall as per 24/7 Sports, while it's 20th per the new sort of, merging of On3 and Rivals. So where the 24/7 composite tends to value quantity, while the On3 or Rivals one tends to value more so who is at the top. Them being so close together sort of tells me that not only is this a class that is deep in terms of the number of guys, but it does have quality there at the top, and we've started to see that with the headliners that they have. So overall, the class is in a very good spot. As we've mentioned, there are a number of guys that we're still looking at to see sort of, are they going to add at certain spots? Maybe they add another wide receiver and CJ Sadler. Maybe they get another defensive lineman such as Viami Moala, but it's really going to be a factor of, waiting and seeing how those turn out, what the commitment dates for those are, what the visits are in the fall, not only for those guys, but also for the commits that they have. Are there any of these guys that want to take fall official visits? We don't know yet. A lot of recruiting, nowadays takes place in the spring and the summer, which is what we've seen thus far, but it's not out of place to see guys, take visits in the fall or closer to signing day. So while the class is in a good spot, it's one that really, with all of college football now, the staff is going to have to continue to recruit and, continue to try to get these guys on campus for fall visits. And as we've discussed multiple times, I think it's going to be absolutely key. And they're going to have opportunities to do so, but it's going to be key for this staff on Saturdays, not only to win games, but to show who they are from a scheme standpoint and really say, here's what we're doing with this guy. Here's what we can do with you, not only from a development standpoint, but from a deployment standpoint of here's what your role can look like in our scheme on offense or on defense on Saturdays in the fall.
Yeah, I'm loving where the class is at. I'm with you. I think you've got the depth. There's no doubt about that. When you've got 32 commits, that shows you where Carolina is at depth-wise already, and they're wanting to get younger. They have a lot of guys, especially on the offensive side of the ball, primarily on that offensive line that they brought in through the transfer portal, that are going to be gone after the season is over. Some of the defensive guys as well are veterans that they brought in and will be gone after a year. So they wanted to get in some of these guys that can provide a little bit of depth, but that are going to be there for a few years down the line moving forward, that they know they can trust, and that they don't have to go into the transfer portal and just get these rental guys to build the entire roster like they pretty much did this year. So they've got that accomplished. There's no doubt that they've taken care of business there. Now, they've, in the last couple of weeks, they've started to take care of the talent issue that many people still see with this group. I don't think that this team lacks that much talent this year. I do think they are going to be competitive. I think this is going to be a team that's probably going to finish 7-5 or 8-4 this year, somewhere in that range, which I think is a good starting spot for this North Carolina Tar Heels program under Bill Belichick. But now you're getting guys at the top of this class that are starting to make you more and more competitive in the years to come. When you've got a headliner like Keon Chapman, when you've got someone like Calvin Thomas that's now a part of the class, when you've got 8 guys in the class that are inside of that top 500 that we talked about. You go back, a couple of months, really just a couple of weeks, and we were talking about how Carolina didn't really have a lot of these headline guys. They had Travis Burgess, they had Xavier Griffin-Haynes, but really outside of that, Carolina and Trayshawn Ruffin, who's been committed to him for a long time. But really, those were the 3 guys that we were talking about. And even, with Xavier Griffin-Haynes, we looked at him as a guy that, Carolina ended up getting back on board. But before he ended up committing, Carolina was in a spot where you were wondering how many headliners are they actually going to be able to bring in. They did a really good job in the state of Alabama, getting Jamarian Gordon out of that state. They went back, got Amari Johnson, which I think was really huge for Carolina as well. So that's now 2 guys that the staff has, had committed at one point, had them decommit, and then ended up landing them again. So those are the big headliners that Carolina needed to bring back. You've got some guys that I really like that are just outside of the top 500, like Will Conroy, Crew Davis, who I think is a guy that if he plays well again this year, I know he's in the state of New York, so that's going to be an area where he's not going to get seen as much as some of these other guys. But if he succeeds this year, he's a guy that has the talent to be a 4-star prospect. I think those are guys that you really like that Carolina has as well that could eventually become 4-stars and become guys that we're counting on in this recruiting class. So I love the balance that Carolina has really started to bring in. It's a really solid overall class. Now, again, I caution people because there are still people that are telling me that this is going to be a top 15 class. And I do believe that there is a path for that, but that path is going to involve flipping guys in season. And I think that's going to be something that's going to be left open. You look at the linebacker position now, and let's talk about that here a little bit. Carolina with 2 commitments officially at that position, with Calvin Thomas being the main guy, and then, of course, Jaden Griffin-Haynes in his first year at that spot. Both guys very similar sized as well. So, plenty of time for them to grow into the line, into their bodies the way that they need to be able to play that linebacker spot. But you said it, this year, we saw some of the linebackers that Carolina had, playing around 230, 235. They're not necessarily these big burly linebackers like we were used to back in the day. They're more athletic. They need to be able to cover. So I think they're in pretty good shape here at the linebacker spot. And then Julian Burns, who, they have to decide whether or not he's going to be a safety or a linebacker. With the way that he plays, he's got the ability to be a linebacker, especially with how well he could cover. That would be welcome at the position. But I think they're probably done at that linebacker spot. And I think they've, loaded up here well enough at the position now that they've got Thomas in. But that means that a guy like Japri Wafer, and that could be a guy that Carolina decides to take on, who knows? But I think, Zach, they're probably leaving open the opportunity for them to potentially get someone at the position and at some of these other positions that may still be seen as maybe a slight need in this class, like the defensive line, like some of these other spots, they're leaving it open to the fact that they could land, some uncommitted prospects, but mainly that they could end up flipping guys once the season starts if they show enough on the field to get those guys convinced that they fit in their system.
Yeah, absolutely. For linebackers specifically, I would agree that, it seems like that's in a pretty good spot, getting two guys out of high school, two officially in Calvin Thompson, in Jaden Griffin-Haynes. And they have a few guys that could go a number of different ways. Julian Burns, like you mentioned, could be a guy that plays safety or linebacker. Lawrence Brown, feels more of an edger right now, but be an off-ball linebacker in the future, depending on how those positions sort of eke out. So it does feel like that they are getting a number of guys that can fit a variety of roles right now at the position. But it is sort of, like you mentioned, a position where they've got a number of guys that are not going to be here come 2026 in Mekhi Gabor and Andrew Simpson, and then a number of guys that they added out of the portal, whether that be Kamari House, Tamir Hickman-Collins, and a number of these freshmen, Lance Pascal, Tyler Hauser, and Jake Bauer. We don't know a lot about this room right now outside of sort of the upper level or, upperclassmen guys that they brought in out of the portal. So it feels like they're in a good spot at the position right now, a good spot overall. But as you mentioned, with the roster overall, it does seem like that they want to get younger. They added guys in the portal here this offseason, but as we've sort of said, their attitude towards the roster is you come in and perform or you're not going to play. And if you want to leave, we're fine with that. We are going to continue to add bodies to either, you play or you don't, you leave or you don't. So they are very open to having roster churn. It seems like they're very open to playing a young guy if a young guy is ready to play, and they're very open to an older guy leaving if they're not performing. So I think that they're leaving any number of things open personally, and along the lines of things that we've discussed on editions of the podcast in the past. I would love to see them perform well and get back in with a number of these guys that are in state. In-state recruiting is always something that has been emphasized here on the podcast. It's always something that's been important to North Carolina when they've been good, not only here in state, but also just in the surrounding areas in Virginia, South Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, places along those lines. And for better or worse, we've seen this class recruit a little bit more nationally. Do I think that can pay off in the long run? Yes. But as sort of a request, as both someone that follows the patterns of recruiting for North Carolina, and then as a fan, I would love to see, what are those avenues that you can get involved with some of these guys locally, because the talent in North Carolina is great this year, and we are seeing a lot of it leave the state. So that's sort of what I'm looking and hoping for come this fall is, can they look to get a little bit more involved with some of these guys that have decided to, at least for now, commit elsewhere? Can they get a little bit more involved there? We'll just have to wait and see, depending on, what the team looks like this fall, not only from a record perspective, but from a, scheme development and deployment perspective as well.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. You know me, I was a guy that when we went through our most wanted in the 2026 class, I told you that a lot of the guys in state were the guys I wanted, because this class is full with a lot. I mean, it's filled with talent. I mean, it's everywhere. So it's definitely a spot that I thought we need to be able to hit hard in this 2026 class. And they've done a good job of recruiting nationally. There's no doubt about that. I mean, you look at the spread of where all of these guys are from, and Carolina has definitely extended its footprint. And they've gotten into some states that I didn't think they necessarily would be able to get into this quickly. Alabama, Texas, California, those are big states that are producing at a pretty high rate. Alabama is one of those states that's on the rise, very similar to North Carolina. Same, Texas, California, those are spots that they don't need to be on the rise. They've been headlining all these classes for years, and Carolina is getting into them. I mean, look, you got 4 guys from the state of North Carolina. So they've done a decent job there, but you would like to see maybe some of these guys in state that Carolina was in consideration for, or some of these guys, even if they're not in state, some of these guys that Carolina is pushing for late in the process. Another name that popped up recently, we talked about it on the last edition of the podcast, was Joel Wyatt. Is that a guy that, hey, maybe he doesn't end up committing to Carolina here during the summer, but if he decides to hold off, or God forbid he does end up committing, maybe there is a chance that Carolina ends up flipping him along the way. And all of a sudden we're talking about Carolina, because of the work that they did just to get into communication with him here in the summer, it ends up working out where Carolina is able to flip some guys. That's going to be the interesting thing to sort of keep an eye on here, because I think, you look at every position group, for the most part, Carolina is in a really good spot. I mean, to me, and I'll let you speak on this, Zach, here in just a minute. I don't see a position of need for Carolina in this class. I think everywhere that Carolina needed to land somebody, they've done it. There are some spots where Carolina is still looking at guys. I think the one area that you would like to see them potentially add a little bit more is on the defensive line. And you may say, how in the world is defensive line a need? You've got 7 guys on the defensive line, 7 or 6. I forget, because they usually they still include Avian Williams as a guy that is listed as a defensive lineman. From all indications, he's going to play tight end. So 6 guys along the defensive line. How could you possibly need anybody else along the defensive line? Well, first of all, the edge rusher position, Carolina's got 2 guys in this class that we know are going to stick at the edge rusher position. But you do have a guy in Lawrence Brown that you've got to figure out where exactly he's going to go. But, I mean, you look at it, Carolina this year, they're going to have Price Yates. He'll be gone after the season. They'll have Smith Vilbert. He'll be gone after the season. So those are impactful guys that are no longer going to be there. I think that's a spot that they could potentially look for somebody to flip down the line, because they don't have anybody right now that they're going after. On the interior of the defensive line, you're not really going to lose anybody you wouldn't expect this offseason. I mean, unless someone really goes nuts. CJ Mims is a junior. DeAndre Robinson is a sophomore. Same thing with Isaiah Johnson, who's a junior as well, the transfer from Arizona. But you would like to have some guys in the future that are, guys that you recruited there. Big bodies in the middle. They've got one. I think they want to add a second one, and we'll see whether or not they're able to do it through there. But for the most part, they've taken care of business just about everywhere that they need to, Zach. And that's why I think, you could be really comfortable with where this class is at, while still wanting to potentially flip some guys down the road, especially some of those guys along the defensive front.
Yeah, absolutely. To sort of echo what you said, I don't think there's any sort of position of need here. I mean, with 32 guys, it's really hard to find a position that's lacking what I would say are sufficient numbers. Would I love another running back? That would be great. Would another slot receiver be great as well? Yes, but these are more so luxury additions than they are a specific dire need. But if there is a need, I would agree that it is defensive line, particularly on the interior of the defensive line. They do have numbers at the position, but really a number of these guys are going to be strictly edge, or are players that are coming in the 260 to 270 range. What I'm looking for are big body guys that are in the 300 range coming out of high school. You feel like you have one option there in Trayshawn Ruffin. They had a guy more recently on the radar in Viami Moala that is transferring from Oregon to Alabama. Will that, materialize into anything? Hard to say. And then you've had a guy on the radar in Joseph Pico that, we probably don't think at this point is going to commit to North Carolina over Colorado, that has both his dad as a coach and then his brother as an incoming commit as well. So that may be a position where they continue to look at guys, a position where they try to circle back with some guys in the state who can say, but if there's any position that I would say, hey, I'd like to see an addition there. I think interior of that defensive line has to be number one on the board out of these options, just because there's not really anywhere else in this recruiting class that you look at and say, hey, we need some more numbers there. We're not getting it in this class right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think you brought up slot receiver. That's another area that I do think that one definitely slipped my mind there. But that's a spot where I think they need somebody as well. Again, that's a position that I don't think you're really going to be struggling at after this year. You're still going to have Isaiah Johnson, who looks like he's going to be the guy that's going to end up starting there, the transfer from Michigan State. You're also going to have Javarius Green at that position as well. And then a few other guys on this roster that can play in that slot spot that you recruited this year, and Shenard Clower, as well as Madrid Tucker. Those are guys that, in the future can play out of that position. But you're probably going to want to add someone, and especially someone with the talent of a guy like CJ Sadler. So now let's transition and tell you the latest on some of these guys here. I'll just run through the latest that I've heard. And again, it hasn't been too long since the last time that we did an edition of the podcast. So there isn't really much on a lot of these guys. CJ Sadler, it seems like as of right now, kind of just in a holding pattern. Don't know if that means that he's going to stick to the commitment date that is listed for him on 24/7 Sports, which is August 15th, right before the start of his senior season. If he does end up sticking to that, then yeah, Carolina is probably the team in the best position. If he doesn't end up sticking to that and he decides that he wants to go into the season with his recruitment, then more than likely you will see him take an official visit to Michigan, and that will then lead to the battle between Carolina and Michigan. We'll see if Carolina can potentially get him back on campus for an unofficial visit. Can't do multiple official visits, but getting him back for an unofficial would be huge for Carolina. But that's kind of where his sits at this point. That means that, his recruitment really is what will determine whether or not Carolina is in the running for Deontay Neal out of Reidsville High School. I think if they end up landing Sadler, they're probably done. So it really just comes down to, what ends up happening there. If if Carolina is, smart, what they're going to do is they're going to sort of pace themselves a little bit with Neal. I know he's right now doesn't look like he has any sort of commitment date that's set. I would imagine that because he is a basketball recruit as well, and a decently touted basketball recruit at that, he is going to wait until the fall to take some visits to some of these schools, both as a football recruit and as a basketball recruit. I think that's going to be very important for Carolina during that time. And if Carolina ends up offering him on the basketball side of things, that's going to make things even a little more interesting between Carolina and Deontay Neal there. But we'll see what ends up happening at that slot receiver position. That's an area that we're still watching. And then you mentioned it, the defensive line is still an area that we're watching, because Carolina with Vielami Moala. Every time I get it right before the podcast, but for some reason when I get on here, it's Viliami Moala. He is a guy that decommitted from Oregon. He was committed to them for a while, was going to high school in Eugene, Oregon. He has since moved and is going to be playing his senior year of high school football at Thompson High School down in Alabaster, Alabama. So Carolina having success in the state of Alabama. Now they get a chance with one of the top recruits that's transferring to the state to potentially go and get him. If it's not him, then T.I. Umo Kais is the guy that I think Carolina is probably looking at as well. As of right now, I don't think he has a decision date, so that probably works out for Carolina, especially because Moala does not have one right now. So they can kind of look at him as a backup plan if they don't end up landing Moala. Joseph Pecco, as you mentioned, not going to end up coming to Carolina. He's going to be going to Colorado, so he's completely off the board. But I think those are the two guys right there, Moala and Umo Kais, that you're hoping Carolina can potentially add at that defensive line spot. And as I mentioned, areas to watch that Carolina could be looking at for a flip. I think you are right about running back. I think they probably want one more guy at that running back position, especially because this is a group that is going to be losing Caleb Hood after the season is over. We don't know how long Davian Goss is going to be at Carolina, especially if he runs the way that he did last year in limited reps. He could be a guy that could be like Amari and Hampton after next season that could be gone. So they probably want to get a little bit of depth at that position. You usually like to bring in 2 running backs per class. So I would look at that as an area to watch for a potential flip in season. And same thing with the edge rusher spot. Now, there is one other guy that I did want to mention before we get out of here. And we can talk a little bit about the need here, Zach, at the cornerback position, because Carolina lands in the top 4 for 2026 3-star cornerback Jamarius Conyers. Now, this is a guy out of Riverview, Florida. Carolina, offered him back in May. They got him on campus back in the middle of June. He took a midweek visit to Carolina, so wasn't nearly as talked about, I think, as some of the other visits that he took. But Carolina's in the top 4 along with NC State, Wake Forest, and Rutgers. And many people feel very good about this coming down to the 3 North Carolina schools here. So, we've looked at cornerback. We've seen Carolina take on a few guys at that position already in this class. We talked about Amari Johnson, Keegan Chapman, as well as Xavier Thomas that Carolina took on as well at the position. So I think, or Xavier Jackson, excuse me, not Xavier Thomas, Xavier Jackson at the position. So Carolina with 3 commitments already there. You've got Jackson, who's 6'1", 185, fits on the outside there. Amari Johnson, 6'1", 180, can play on the outside. But this is another guy, 6'2", in height. A guy that I think Carolina would like to potentially add to this class. But I do think that this is one that could end up going the way of one of the other in-state schools. But Zach, if he does end up wanting to come to Carolina, what do you think about adding another cornerback in this class?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at this position, it's one that they have added a large number of numbers, really, so to speak. I mean, they have potentially 8 guys committed right now that look to be defensive backs, but they have a number of guys that can go really a number of different ways in terms of what they play. I mean, you mentioned a guy like Julian Burns could play safety, could also play linebacker. Amari Johnson, that recommitted, we think is going to be a cornerback right now, but obviously can play both ways. And then you have a number of guys that really could go a number of different spots. Marcellus Ryan, Jaden Jefferson, Xavier Jackson. They can play a number of positions, whether that be corner, safety, or sort of that nickel spot right now. So I think if this is one they want to add another guy, and they certainly can, that's sort of been the idea thus far in terms of this class. Whenever we think that they're going to be done at a position, they take another guy there. So it could go either way, I feel like, in terms of if they add this guy and does he fit. I think there's an avenue that he certainly could fit into this class and it not feel like they're taking too many guys. And, this continues to be a room in terms of the offer, in terms of the guys that are there right now, where it's hard to say what they have on the roster right now at the position. We feel like that they have some talent, but you have guys that don't seem like they're going to return after, or that are not going to return. And, Thaddeus Dixon and Marcus Allen that you feel like are pretty good as your sort of outside corner starters right now. Outside of that, it's hard to really say what you have at the position. So this is one that it does seem like they've wanted to add numbers at. And with the amount of guys that they have right now that can sort of go a number of different ways, it's not out of the realm of possibility. Does it seem like a lot at the position? A little bit, yes. But it would not be terribly surprising if this is a recruitment that North Carolina can continue to progress in ahead of any sort of commitment and potentially win, depending on how, a number of things go.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the flexibility of some of these guys. I mean, Amari Johnson's a guy that, he can play wide receiver if they need him to play that position and if he doesn't fit at corner, but he can also play safety. So he's a guy that I could see playing really either the cornerback spot or that safety spot once he gets to Carolina. The thing that I think you have to wonder is, what do they think about Keegan Chapman? 5'11", 160 pounds. Now, again, this past year, they did have Elijah Huzzie, who was a little bit undersized, and he played on the outside. I think Keegan Chapman can hold up on the outside. He did it at the high school level, but do they think that? Or do they look at him as a guy that's going to be in there at that nickel corner position along with Marcellus Ryan? If they do, then this might be a more important position for Carolina than we think. You mentioned, after the season is over, you're going to lose Thaddeus Dixon. You're going to lose Marcus Allen. Those guys are graduating. At nickelback, you'll be losing Gavin Gibson. This is a veteran group of guys that will be starting for this group. And then outside of that, there's a lot of guys that are just unknown. You don't know what they bring to the table because we haven't seen them. And the other thing is that this staff is going to recruit a lot of guys probably at these positions, because this is one of those positions where a lot of these guys are holdovers from Mack Brown. And I think there's some potential for a lot of these guys. I do think that, I mean, looking at some of the guys that are projected on the two deep, Ty Adams, I think he's a guy that we saw flashes from last year, but there was also inconsistencies. You're hoping that changes moving forward. Jalen Thompson, Trey Miller, those are guys that played sparingly, but you're hoping that they can sort of materialize into something. But without that being guaranteed, I think this staff has to recruit some of their own guys at the position. So this would not be the most shocking take for Carolina. I do think that it probably favors NC State or Wake Forest at this point over Carolina, but it's definitely a name to know going into tomorrow when he will announce his commitment. And of course, we'll have you covered with everything on the website, HeelToughBlog.com. Make sure you guys head over there right now. Check out all the articles that we have up for you guys. We got that Calvin Thomas commitment article up there that we really encourage you guys to check out. It breaks him down in depth, even more in depth than we talked about him here today. So make sure you go and check that out for us. Also, we will have you covered on any of the other announcements that will be coming up. We'll be continuing to check in on, where things are at as we go throughout the summer. I won't do it like weekly, but when we get, some sort of news where guys are starting to go off the board, there will be times where I will reset the who are we still watching in the 2026 article that was up there on the website. And I'll be sharing that throughout the summer here as we continue to go through the decision portion here. We're starting to get pretty close. I mean, August, we're in the middle of July right now. Mid-August is when we start high school football season. So you will see a lot of these guys that are going to jump on some of these offers that they have, make their commitment soon. And so we will make sure that we have you covered with all those for the big targets for Carolina. Also, I'll be keeping you tabs on that on my social media page at HTB Anthony if you guys want to go over there and give it a follow. Meanwhile, podcast side of things are about to get real interesting, guys, because yes, we will still be talking recruiting. Don't worry about that. Any news that comes out, we'll be talking about it. But it's also time for the position previews. We're going to go through each position. We're going to tell you what we think for this upcoming season, and it'll start once I get back from vacation. So we'll be hitting it hard. I think Friday is probably going to end up being the first edition that we're going to do, and that will be the quarterbacks this year. So a lot of Gio Lopez talk, a lot of Max Johnson talk, a lot of Bryce Baker coming up. So make sure that you guys are locked in for all that. Best way you can do that is subscribing to either the podcast, wherever you get your podcast, or to the YouTube page or our Facebook page. That's the best way to get access to all of that stuff. Also, we encourage you to go over to the Twitter page for the Heel Tough Blog, at Heel Tough Blog on Twitter. Make sure you follow and turn on the notifications. It's right there next to it after you follow. Just hit that little bell, turn on all notifications, and that means whenever we put up a live video, whenever we put up a previous edition of the podcast, or if we put up any articles, you will be notified whenever that stuff goes up. Can't do that on any other website, so that is the best place to be able to do all of that stuff. So make sure you check out that feature and use it. We would greatly appreciate that, and it would work out great for you guys to catch all of our content. Basketball side of things, we're in the middle of the What If series, so make sure you're keeping up with all that on the Four Corners podcast side of things. We'll be going live again on Thursday to talk about the 1960s. We talked about the 1950s last time around. We'll be talking about the 1960s, an era where Carolina had some success. And, of course, we will be talking about the passing of the Kangaroo Kid, Bill Cunningham. That was a tough loss for the Carolina family, and so we'll be talking about him coming up on the next edition of the podcast. Make sure that you guys don't miss that edition. That'll be a special one for sure. So that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast. Want to thank Zack for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.